Hey everyone, welcome back to Real Management Talk with LJ and Jocelyn. As you know, we started this podcast as kind of a lark based on discussions that LJ and I've had for years. And we thought that, hey, why not talk with you all about things that not only do we talk with each other about, but we actually talk with our clients about as well as we're going. So how you doing today, LJ?
I'm doing fantastic. I'm so happy to see you. Your hair looks great.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Yours does too. I love it.
Thank you.
So how
going all natural.
As you know, our audience knows I've been moving, so now I'm on the East Coast, in the great state of Virginia.
Yes, Virginia is for lovers.
How's the weather where you are?
I feel like it's about the same on the east as where you are now, because it's been a nice cool off for the past couple of days. Like everything has just been like really nice and tepid and just not too humid, not too hot, just comfortable finally. So it's like a high of 89, 91. It's very comfortable.
Yeah, well, the other night, while we were moving, we stopped in Ohio to see, because of the hurricane, we ended up taking a really northern route to get here, but we stopped to see my mother-in-law, my sister-in-law, and like that, and have dinner with them. And so we're all sitting outside, and my sister-in-law literally had to go get me a sweater because it was like, this no lie, it was like 85 degrees, but I was freezing. I was freezing.
Those 100-degree days in San Antonio definitely will have you feeling when it's like in the 80s. It's very funny.
Yeah, I know. It was funny. I was laughing. I'm like, man, I haven't needed a sweater at 85 degrees for a long time, right?
Right.
But anyways, so today, I'm talking to you from the ballroom of the hotel that we're staying in, while we shoot this podcast, while we're waiting for our house and all of that. And, what a great time for us to start talking about one of our other favorite subjects, succession planning or transition. Like when transitions happen within nonprofits, and because they do happen, as we both know. So what do you think about succession planning?
Succession planning for most leaders, and I'm talking staff and board of directors, succession planning is something that you either avoid to do altogether, or when you do it, it's sort of like okay, yeah, we're going to check this box. Yeah, we'll agree to retain these documents and transition this before we go. I think it's that way because leaders within the organization, whether you be on payroll or whether you're a volunteer, you don't ever want to think about the possibility of not doing whatever it is that you're doing. You don't want to think about the possibility of not being able to do that, in the future. I think succession planning and really thinking about, how to properly transition leadership within an organization, it requires a lot of maturity on part of the organization, right? The organization has to be able to sort of impress upon its employees, impress upon its board of directors that we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And instead of letting it be a surprise, we want to start to, put together some plans that you are comfortable with, because we want your voice before you transition out of that position. For whatever reason, we know that change is going to come. It's inevitable. And so we want to make sure that when that change comes, that we can mitigate the risk associated with, that transition. What do you think?
No, well, and I think that you're right on about that, especially about the avoidance or the sort of kind of done it on paper. But it's really, really important. And a lot of times when we talk about the subject, we have a tendency, and even with organizations I've worked in, or even others that I've worked with on this, we have a tendency to think about it's like something really big, like if a certain leader leaves, or a board member resigns that's in a key position, or something like that. But you know, there can be instances where it's not that big, but you still have to have a type of succession plan in place. For instance, I worked for an organization, actually in San Antonio, where the CEO got very ill and was hospitalized and literally couldn't run the organization. And that meant that we had to have somebody temporarily in charge. And if we had not had a plan, and we had kind of a loose plan for like if the ED stepped down, but we didn't have that interim plan. So the board got together and voted that really the COO should step in as the interim, right? For while the CEO was not able to perform their duties due to the situation. And you can have instances like that we fail to actually plan for. And that creates chaos in an organization. Well, of course, that board of directors, once they realized that, they actually did create a whole succession plan for like multiple scenarios. And it wasn't just for the CEO. They took a look at the development position. They took a look at the head of programming position. Look at what happened with the board of directors. I mean, and every scenario, so that it was very clear to everybody, you know. But oftentimes I find that most organizations don't have it. Most nonprofits don't. Even most businesses don't. Even when they're really large, they actually don't. And you know, it's definitely something that it really is a board of director thing. When we start talking governance, I know you and I haven't talked governance a whole lot on here yet, and yet being our optimal word, right? But I just think that you have to be prepared because transitions are going to happen. They just are. They're a fact of life. You know, sometimes they happen when we plan for them, and sometimes they happen when we don't plan for them. So, but in a business though, we have to know exactly how that's gonna happen. Like in my own business, for instance, I knew, so in 2019, when my mother very suddenly passed away, I knew exactly who I could hand my company off to, so to speak, to handle the day-to-day stuff. Well, quite honestly, I wasn't mentally able to run the business for a little bit because I was dealing with, you know, all the stuff that goes into that. And I know that you have plans too, you know, because, well, no, but I mean, right? So nonprofit is no different. It's absolutely no different.
Absolutely. I mean, and you made some really good points there. You know, with business, people have to be oriented to what that means to have a business mindset. And I think that a lot of us, you know, remember last time in our previous episode, we talked about the scarcity mindset a bit as it relates to, you know, who you perceive as competition versus what you perceive as competition, right? Are you benchmarking your own success or your own, what you may perceive as failures as competitions or competitive sort of milestones, or are you looking, you know, extrinsically or outward? Those things are important. And so when I think about succession planning and, you know, inevitable transitions for businesses, whether you be organized for-profit or nonprofit, you really, like you said, it's got to start with your leadership. It's not going to be common to see grassroots where your staff or your volunteers at the sort of functional level of the organization are going to be taking it upon themselves to be better about documenting their day-to-day or standardizing how they transact business or standardizing how they determine, when a critical incident takes place, how they determine, who gets the information first and how it's supposed to be distributed and things of that sort. The minutia is going to have to come from those board governance documents. So, a lot of that needs to be taken into account when you're thinking about sustainability for the organization. Sustainability for the organization is the charge of the board of directors. And the chief executives. So those are conversations that you definitely need to be having if you're not having them. And, you can always hire folks like myself and Jocelyn to help you really figure out what exactly the process needs to be so that it's perceived at least as procedurally just. It's not an affront to any one particular leader. It's not a sort of, trigger that you're not doing your job all that great and we need to be thinking about, forcing you to transition. That's not what succession planning is about, even though I know for a lot of leaders, it can feel that way. It's supposed to be part of your strategic planning, and strategic planning should be something that you engage in often, because you always, you're working in a very turbulent environment, and through all the turbulence and tumult, there should be changes that you're tracking, that you're constantly sort of benchmarking to figure out if you're, meeting your key performance indicators, if you're meeting your goals, if you're meeting your objectives for your programs and for your organization. So a lot of those types of conversations need to be had all throughout the organization. Succession planning, like Jocelyn was saying, is not something that's just restricted to the board, although it's supposed to really sort of originate there because you're setting the tone at that level. Because, again, strategic planning is supposed to be how the thing that guides the work that everyone does within the organization, right? That's supposed to be the guidepost. But the reality is that succession planning is something that everyone has to do, whether you're on payroll or not, because the assumption is that if something was to happen to you, if you were to, abandon the post that you have had with the organization, if some sort of disruption happens, we don't want whatever it was that you were doing to support the mission and the vision, the goals and the objectives of the organization. We don't want that to just disappear. That's what you have to remember. The whole point of you placing high value on succession planning and on sustainability conversations is that's your bottom line. Your bottom line is that the organization thrives, it functions and it thrives when you're able to take account of all that makes it possible, all that makes success possible throughout the entire organization. You've got to take inventory. So again, succession planning is something that's really uncomfortable for a lot of organizations, a lot of leaders. So, sometimes it helps, like I said, to hire myself or Jocelyn to come in as the outsiders who are not going to be particularly partial or perceived to be particularly partial to any individual within your organization. And, we know how to set up succession planning exercises and strategic planning exercises that will engage staff, volunteers who may not be on the board, the directors or trustees that may be on the board, and any of those external stakeholders, like some of your grantors who may actually want a seat at the table. You'd be surprised just how important it is for you to talk about sustainability with your grantors and your partners, your strategic partners, because when they know that you are thinking about tomorrow, or when they know that you're thinking about your future, they're more likely to want to support you today. And that's something that you got to remember and keep in mind. You got to be strategic in all that you do, especially nowadays with so much going on, so many distractions all of the time. The way to stay visible and get visible is to do substantive things like succession planning in a very sort of informed and engaging format, which is going to include those partners of yours and those other agencies who already probably support your organization through grants or, other means, or who maybe want to support you. They might have an employee volunteer program. They may not know well enough what it is that you do and how their employees can volunteer with you. Invite them to your succession planning session. That way they get an understanding of what it is that you do, but they also understand how you're trying to sustain what it is that you do and why it matters. Be strategic, people.
Yeah, I was just thinking that, you know, the being strategic, that's what it's all about, right? I mean, you have the, it's really about continuation. I mean, that's really what succession planning is about. It's about continuation. So whether you're the founder of your organization, whether, you know, you're the 15th person to run the organization, it's still about continuity and keeping everything that's been worked for going, and also not having absolute chaos. Because it can be absolute chaos when there's not been any thought whatsoever to what happens if. And, you know, none of us like to think about that, but we have to think about that as business owners, nonprofit founders, nonprofit workers, we need to be part of that conversation and to think about it. So, and I'm sure we're going to come back to this at some point, probably when we talk governance and stuff again, because there's lots of things that interlace, right? I mean, you and I both know it's not really siloed conversations, even though some of these might seem siloed right now, but they really interact together. And I love the way that you brought in like the funders and like that, because today, I mean, I see it all the time. Funders want to know, do you have a succession plan? They want to know that if they are investing in you, because your funders really are investors, they want to know if they're investing in you, are you still going to be around if something happens? So, because that weighs heavily into their discussion, just like it does any investor who's looking at any type of company, right? And that's probably a different discussion too about how you look at your non-investment. But anyways,
that's going to be a fun one.
Yeah, it'll be a fun one. So we're going to wrap this week's episode up. Guys, thank you again for joining us. Really appreciate you listening and viewing, and however you're hearing us, whether you're watching us on YouTube here or on any of 7 of the most major podcast platforms that there are out there. You can find us, so you can take us on the go, whichever way works out for you. And we really, really appreciate it. And so say goodbye. We'll see you on next week's episode. Bye.
One thing.
Yes.
One last thing. Make sure, guys, I don't know if we announced this on a previous episode. Make sure that you check us out on LinkedIn. We are at Real Management Talk on LinkedIn. We are at Real Management Talk on Instagram and on Facebook. Real Management Talk on Facebook. And I believe in our email, we have an email. So if you ever want to ask questions or you want to get in touch with us, email us at guy@realmanagementtalk.com. So make sure when you're reading, when you're listening to these episodes, always feel free to, leave a comment, like or share the episode, get in touch with us. Let us know if you have any questions. We're always happy to address any questions that you may have. So definitely reach out, get in touch with us. You got LJ and you got Jocelyn. So get in touch with Real Management Talk with LJ and Jocelyn anytime through social or through our email.
Yep. All right. So guys, we're going to see you all, or maybe you're listening to us next week on next week's episode. And we're going to say adieu for now. All right.
Adieu.